Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel on the rejection of Corb Lund's petition. But first, the push for a cross-country connection.
All Canadians deserve a stable, secure, and reliable energy supply. Alberta is ready to provide that stability.
We need to take action now to protect Canadian jobs and Canadian families.
Premiers making the case for what's being called the Northern Shield Energy Corridor, a 500,000-barrel-a-day pipeline that would connect Hardisty in Alberta with refineries in southern Ontario. And it comes just days after the Smith government submitted its own proposal for a pipeline to the West Coast. Joining us now, Richard Masson, former CEO of the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission. Richard, good to see you, sir. Welcome back.
Great to be here, Michael.
All right, well, let's start on Northern Shield. Is this essentially a modified version of Energy East? What do you make of the proposal?
Well, it isn't that, because Energy East was using a natural gas pipeline for 2/3 of the route and going to a deepwater port in New Brunswick for export. It was an export-oriented pipeline. This is a duplicate pipeline to the existing Enbridge system. Currently, there are 4 refineries in Ontario. They get their feedstock from Western Canada through Enbridge, and then some volumes go on to Montreal through Line 9. And so what this proposal so far would do is just duplicate that with a whole bunch of cost and very little benefit.
The premiers appear to have been discussing this over the past year or so, but to what degree was this on the radar of the oil industry?
I don't think anybody in the industry thinks that this is going to happen, and I don't think it's on their radar. I spent the morning at a conference listening to CEOs of some of the big producers, and it didn't come up as anything that people are talking about. You know, this idea is really driven by the notion that Michigan is fighting to shut down Line 5, which is one of the pieces of the Enbridge system that goes to Sarnia, and that Donald Trump potentially could restrict our shipments through the U.S. to those refineries. But if those are the risks that we're worried about, building a pipeline 10 years from now at a cost of probably $40 or $50 billion probably isn't the best answer. I would argue that it's much better to build some rail unloading facilities at those terminals so that you could bring rail crude from Alberta, which we already have lots of rail loading facilities here, and move it there on the existing rail line quickly.
Okay, well, now, anyone who has traveled Highway 17 through Ontario has a good sense of what the geography is like through that neck of the woods. What kind of ingenuity, were a pipeline to go ahead, what kind of ingenuity would it take to build such across the Canadian Shield?
Well, you can do it. Our natural gas pipelines do that. So we chose, when we were building pipelines back, decades ago, to make sure that the gas pipeline went over the top of Lake Superior. We chose not to do that for the oil pipelines. Some people argue that was cost savings, but penny wise, pound foolish over the long term, though we've never seen those pipelines actually shut down. But it would be expensive to do. Just to give a sense of cost of things, that 1 million barrel a day pipeline to the West Coast is being talked about as a potentially $40 billion project for 1,200 kilometers. Got to go over some mountain ranges, needs to have a terminal. But this pipeline would have to go 3,300 kilometers just to get to Sarnia. So it's not clear what it would cost, but it would be a lot of money. And certainly private sector folks wouldn't be keen to sign up for the toll that would be associated with it.
Beyond that energy security element that you were talking about a moment ago, were there to be a pipeline, would there be value in branching off to tap export markets to the east, be that through the Port of Churchill or otherwise? Could that make it more viable?
I don't think Hudson's Bay is going to prove to be a viable option. Right now, there's about 4 months a year where you can ship without ice, and oil pipelines need to run every day, right? The oil's got to move. It moves about a pace that you walk. You can't just shut it off for months in the freezing cold and hope that it'll be all okay in the spring. So oil pipelines are not well suited to part-time ports. And certainly we could try to get to the New Brunswick refinery, but part of the issue of that was Quebec and the challenges by the government and the individuals in Quebec at the time. And all those issues would have to be dealt with again in order to get to New Brunswick.
All right, let's shift focus to Alberta's pipeline submission to the Major Projects Office last week. What's to be made of the degree of private sector buy-in, with Pembina looking at a 10% stake that at this point is still considered non-binding?
Yeah, I guess I would say I'm heartened that Alberta heard the feedback from many different participants and chose the southern route. And I'm heartened that the federal government said Trans Mountain could be the proponent, because what we now have is a route that doesn't have to have the tanker ban lifted, which is going to mean less Indigenous conflict. It means that we just built a pipeline through that route. We know everything about the environmental elements of it, the difficult parts of the terrain. We have a pipeline company that just built a big project that knows how to do it. We can build off the existing right-of-way. We can do it potentially incrementally. And so there are many, many things that are favorable from this choice that could help to reduce cost and speed it up. Still, it's going to face high hurdles because the toll at the end of the day has to be competitive with the alternatives, or you won't get shippers signing up for 20-year take-or-pay commitments.
Along with Alberta's pitch to the West Coast, there's also the proposed Prairie Connector to Wyoming. What kind of changes to production capacity would be required of the oil sands to sufficiently fill a growing list of potential new pipelines, make them viable?
There's four things on the table practically. There's 300,000 barrel a day debottlenecking of the existing Trans Mountain expansion. There's 400,000 barrels a day that Enbridge has in process right now. Prairie Connector is about 550,000 barrels a day. So that's 1.2 million barrels a day. And then this new million barrel a day pipeline. So 2.2 million barrels a day. Of that, about 650,000 barrels a day is going to have to be diluent that we're going to have to get from somewhere. And the balance, 1.6 million barrels a day would be new bitumen production coming from the oil sands. Those are very ambitious numbers. And so, in a world where we're moving forward on all of that, we're going to see a huge amount of economic activity associated with looking for the diluent, drilling condensate, producing natural gas associated with the diluent, pipeline construction, fractionation construction, many, many different things. I do want to say, based on what I heard at the conference today, the TD Stampede Investment Conference, CEOs are sounding much more enthusiastic given the alignment between the federal government and the Alberta government and BC's willingness to live with this situation. I think that they see a lot of opportunity. Not everything's in place yet. They're still looking to settle on what they're going to do with pathways and how they're going to finance that. But I think there's a huge opportunity emerging here for Western Canada to really start developing this resource over the coming decade.
All right, we'll have to leave it there for time. Appreciate getting your perspectives this evening. Richard, thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Take care.
Richard Masson, former CEO of the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission. From the preponderance of pipelines to Corb Lund's petition being ruled a failure and another MP leaving the Conservative caucus. Time now for tonight's politics panel, and joining us this evening, Calgary-based public opinion consultant Janet Brown and John Brennan, political analyst and commentator. Good evening to you both, and let's begin with the latest pipeline developments, including the Northern Shield Energy Corridor proposal jointly announced in Calgary Monday by the premiers of Alberta and Ontario. Janet, Richard Masson, former head of the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission, brought us his perspective off the top. Where do you weigh in on the two provinces making this announcement now?
Well, I'll just come clean and I'll say I was totally unexpected for me. I was at an event yesterday and a reporter came up to me and told me about it. And I said, what? I pride myself on sort of hearing the rumors before they hit the news. So the new pipeline yesterday was a complete surprise. And So for somebody like me, it's really hard to wrap your mind around, the feasibility of it or that sort of thing. Here in Alberta, we have been so focused on the West Coast pipeline. It fits with the memo of understanding. This new pipeline, at this moment, I'm not exactly sure what to make of it. It just seems like, Doug Ford wanted to get to the microphone during Stampede and wanted to show some support to Danielle Smith in Alberta.
John, what kind of political heft do you see needing to be behind this proposal to give it the traction to get it off the ground? How likely is it to go beyond the two premiers making an announcement during Stampede?
I don't think it's likely at all, Michael. It makes no sense economically because of the distance, 3,300 kilometers. And there's already oil pipelines through the Enbridge main line and through Line 5 around the Great Lakes that are delivering oil from Alberta to the refineries in Sarnia and also onto the refinery in Montreal. So there's not a need for it at this point. The only reason you would build an oil pipeline across the country would be for export. And that was the original Energy East proposal to deliver oil from Alberta to St. John, New Brunswick, both for refining there and for export. The only other reason is for energy security, because you remember, Michael, a few years ago, Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, was trying her best to try to shut down Enbridge's Line 5, which, of course, takes oil up to the refineries in Sarnia. But, she lost a number of court cases with regard to that. In particular, courts ruled that it was the federal government of the United States that had jurisdiction, and the Biden administration made it clear that Line 5 was going to stay open. So right now, there isn't an urgent case for it, whereas there is a case for the West Coast pipeline.
Janet, if it is the Northern Shield doesn't end up flying, how likely is it to get people worked up the way Northern Gateway and Energy East remain in the collective memory?
Well, I think the positive for Alberta and for the Premier is that it's another premier showing support for Alberta's oil and gas industry, showing support to get the product to market. So it does seem like a long shot, this other pipeline. Even if it were to be approved, we're talking years and years away. But when you look at the West pipeline, there's much tighter deadlines being applied to that. And some of that is driven by the memo of understanding between the Premier and the Prime Minister. And some of that is driven by the upcoming referendum that both the Premier and Mark Carney want to show that they've made some important effort, some important developments on this file before they go to a referendum. I think the Ontario one at best just looks like maybe a vote of approval and maybe a suggestion that the rest of Canada is not going to be as belligerent against this.
John, we've had a few days now to digest the Premier's delivery of that West Coast pipeline proposal to the Major Projects Office last week. What's striking you most about the way that's playing out?
I think by and large is playing out positively. And, we heard that in your interview with Richard Masson, Michael, where he said oil company CEOs are feeling very bullish about it. This is a real project. We have both the government of Canada and the government of Alberta and Pembina Pipelines in a partnership that are going to push this project forward. We have the route, the existing Trans Mountain route. They're going to now take it to Roberts Bank, the Delta Superport just south of Vancouver, and that will enable them to load even bigger tankers than the tankers that are coming in and out of the Burrard Inlet to the Trans Mountain facility at Westridge. So, it has a route. It has the government backing from the two big governments here. There is a partnership with a private company. Now, that being said, Michael, this is going to take a long time to build. There's going to have to be an environmental assessment done. There's going to be intensive consultations with Indigenous communities are going to have to be done. But I see this West Coast pipeline, Michael, as a realistic project and something that will get done. But it's going to take a long time. The proposal itself, Michael, suggests that it'll take 6 years to build it if construction begins next year, which is the plan.
Janet, 90% of the cost of this pipeline is proposed to be backstopped by taxpayer dollars. What are you watching for and how that particular element lands politically with Albertans?
Well, now that it's twinning the Trans Mountain pipeline, I guess it makes sense for Trans Mountain to be involved. And Trans Mountain is a Crown corporation set up for the TMX expansion. So on the one hand, I think it kind of makes sense given our current environment. But when the TMX was built, the idea was eventually it would be sold. So I think there is going to be an appetite to see these projects eventually end up in private hands. But we are where we are right now, and that private enterprise is feeling that this is a risk. They're feeling like it's a risk from a legislative point of view, from a regulatory point of view. So I think this is the way forward for the Premier, Danielle Smith, for the Prime Minister. They need shovels in the ground. They need to show that this project has started. And there'd be many details to be worked out, First Nations, ownership, that sort of thing. But I think everybody is just, like I said, in a race to get shovels in the ground.
All right, time for us to take a bit of a break. But when we come back, Corb Lund's response to the rejection of his anti-coal petition. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. Corb Lund says he's meeting with lawyers. The Alberta entertainer submitted his Water Not Coal petition last month with more than 207,000 signatures. Late last week, however, Elections Alberta rejected more than 35,000 of the signatures, enough to fail the petition in the verification process. Lund is questioning the process, calling it a ridiculously large number given the thoroughness and dedication of volunteers. The singer says the group has 30 days to put the issue before a judge for a review. I'll start with you first this time, John. How surprised were you by this petition being ruled a failure?
I was surprised, Michael. When Corb Lund and his group delivered it to Elections Alberta, and he said he had over 200,000 signatures, and he only had to make 177,000, I thought they had the room there. But the fact that Elections Alberta ruled out so many signatures, raises questions. Now, Elections Alberta, we have to remember, is a nonpartisan organization that is set up to run our elections, referendums, recall petitions, and all the rest of it. So, I trust their judgment. That being said, if you see the statements that Corb Lund has put out in the last day or two, there seems to be some concerns by the way this petition was evaluated. So it'll be interesting to see if he decides to take it to court.
Janet, what kind of light do you see this Corb Lund situation shedding on the petition process generally? And does that process warrant being questioned?
Well, like John, I was surprised that the petition was rejected because Corb Lund and his organization did seem really well organized and did seem to have all their ducks in a row. But it looks like perhaps they didn't do enough of their own internal evaluations on those signatures before they turned them in. And so that's unfortunate for them. But for me, what it does is it begs the question of the status of the separation referendum. That referendum has not gone to counting because the question that's now on the ballot is not tied to that referendum. Now, that's giving those people that's giving the separatists the opportunity to say, they've had these hundreds of thousands of signatures on their petition, but without verification, it makes you wonder how fulsome that list is. So, at the end of the day, it is a big exercise to get all these signatures. It should be a big exercise to get enough signatures to launch a referendum. And unfortunately, I think Corb Lund and his group, they learned the hard way that they needed an even bigger buffer than they went out. But I think, though, that if petitions are going to be coming into Elections Alberta, it behooves them to count them all so that we really have a realistic assessment of where we're standing. Corb Lund's petition is come short. Let's find out if the other one came short or not.
John, is that the potential answer here? Count them all. Verify everything.
I guess so, Michael. Like, I don't want to second guess the work that Elections Alberta is doing because, as I said in the previous segment, this is a nonpartisan organization doing its best. And we have to remember all the stuff that is being dumped on Elections Alberta, from all those recall petitions last year and earlier this year to these referendums, this huge referendum vote that's going to take place on October 19th. Planning for next year's election before we even have the new electoral boundaries in place. Plus, there's going to be a by-election in Calgary-Shaw sometime later this year. So, I guess that could be the answer. I think it'll be really interesting, to Janet's point. Elections Alberta has now begun the verification of the separatist petition because, of course, they won a small part of that court case a couple of weeks ago that allows for the verification to take place. So it'll be interesting to see once that is done, and I think Elections Alberta said it should be done by the end of July, exactly how many verified signatures have been verified for the separatist petitions by Elections Alberta.
Yeah, and how that could weigh against the question in the referendum. Okay, one more quick topic for us. That's the Prime Minister appointing 4 people to the Senate today, including a Conservative MP. Richard Martel is stepping down as a Member of Parliament to move to the upper chamber, becoming the 5th Conservative to leave Pierre Poilievre's caucus since the last election. Among those joining Martel in the Senate, Prime Minister Carney's principal secretary, Tom Pitfield. Janet, how do you see the Martel development landing in Conservative circles? What kind of impact might this carry?
Well, today's announcement is significant for a whole bunch of reasons. And just one of those reasons is because Carney picked a Conservative MP to sit there, causing the Conservative Party to lose another member. But the bigger issue at play here is Carney has decided to throw away some of the things that Trudeau was trying to implement. And one of them was to make the Senate less partisan. And so not only has he elected somebody from another party, he's elected somebody who's overtly partisan. And the same with Tom Pitfield. He is very much an insider where Carney is concerned. Now, Trudeau had instituted this process where people who were interested in the Senate could fill out forms, they could apply. And I think what Mark Carney's saying is that, he's going to throw that formula away. He's way more interested in somebody's resume than he is interested in their personal enthusiasm for the job.
John, how do you like this as a fresh injection of politics back into the Senate?
It goes to show you that Mark Carney is a lot more astute politician than a lot of people gave him credit for, because he's also aware of the fact that to get his legislative agenda through Parliament, he needs to get it through both the House of Commons and the Senate. And so the current makeup of the Senate has not really challenged him that much in his first year in office, but he wants to make sure going forward that he's got loyal Liberals in there that'll make sure that they approve the things that the Liberal government presents in the House of Commons. So, he's decided to get rid of this nonpartisan appointment process and establish a new process. And as Janet just said, these are clearly partisan appointments, a Conservative MP and Tom Pitfield, who was his principal secretary, and also the son of Michael Pitfield, who, of course, was the clerk of the Privy Council under Pierre Trudeau back in the 1970s and early 1980s.
Janet, last 30 seconds or so to you. Worrisome for Pierre Poilievre, who many Albertans know is making the rounds across the province this week.
This is worrisome. There's lots of infighting with the Conservatives. You just go on Twitter. I enjoy the fireworks every night of Conservative insiders talking about whether it's time for Pierre Poilievre to go. He lost his seat. He lost an election. He's lost all of these MPs. The one thing Pierre Poilievre has going for him right now is that there's no blatant opponent who's gunning for his job. But once we see someone start gunning for his job, then I think the final countdown is really on Pierre Poilievre.
All right, we'll leave it there. Great to see you both. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Now, here are a few responses to a recent story posted by CTV News about the Alberta-Ontario pitch for a west-east oil pipeline. Kingfisher writes, good, let's all work together and make money for Canada. We have to work together to make things better. Iron Maiden says, no more citizens' tax money. Colton's 2 cents are this. Keeping it within Canada would definitely provide better energy security, but it's going to be a massive battle with environmental regulations. And Paula is skeptical, saying she'll believe it when there are pipes in the ground. Have your say. Email us anytime at comments@albertaprimetime.com. Coming up tomorrow, the drive to deliver a new West Coast pipeline. We catch up with the mayor of Edson for what the multi-billion-dollar project could bring to his community. That's on Wednesday. Until then, have a great evening, everyone, from all of us at Alberta Primetime. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time.